am announcing my candidacy for governor of the state of Florida.
Philip Levine is already running hard for governor. Why is he the best choice for the Democrats? We'll ask him. He is with us live.
I love my dad. I love all of my parents. They are important to me.
Some 60,000 Haitians get bad news on TPS. It's going to end in 18 months unless Congress acts. Will they?
Turn up a chain, turn up a chain, turn up a chain, turn up a chain.
The Hurricanes turnover chain, fans love it, and so do the players. It's big, it's gaudy, it's come to symbolize Miami. Is that a good thing? We will ask the roundtable. Good morning, glad you could join us. Glenna is off today. We're going to begin today with a race for governor. Yes, we know it's a long way off. The primary election is still 9 months away, and we won't get a new governor until next November. But a handful of candidates already are running hard. One Democrat from South Florida recently threw his hat into the ring. Philip Levine of Miami Beach. He served 2 terms as mayor there and made sea level rise his signature issue. He will continue to hit that hard in his governor campaign, but he lacks name recognition across the state, has no statewide political experience, and he faces some tough opponents. One, former Congresswoman Gwen Graham. And Philip Levine is with us live in the studio this morning. Philip, good morning. Great to have you come in.
Thank you, Michael.
Let's begin with the most basic question. Why are you running for governor?
Because I believe we need a real change in Tallahassee, and I'm going to bring that change to Tallahassee. And it's a bunch of things, Michael. It's literally because I know that Tallahassee has been controlling our lives, but not in the right way across the state of Florida. And I think we need to bring local government back to the people to get things done like we did in Miami Beach. And there's so many issues that we need to focus on, whether it's
sea level rise,
sure,
or the correction system, or criminal justice, or
absolutely, or bringing the right companies to Florida so we have great jobs by bringing a higher minimum living wage to the state of Florida. And of course, healthcare, education, all the things you just mentioned, we got to get it done, and that's been my slogan for a long time.
I don't want to make this too personal, but you're 55, you're in good health, an active guy. You and your fiancée, who you've been with a long time, just had a beautiful little baby boy. You've made a good deal of money in your professional life in the media business. A lot of people would say, why is this so important to you?
I heard the same thing when I ran for mayor of Miami Beach. I said half my friends thought it was great. The other half said you need to see a psychiatrist, Michael. But you know what? I believe in the American dream. And if people like myself, people that have that really crazy, weird thing in their background, called a job, if they don't run for elective office, who are we going to get? All these career politicians, folks that can't get things done. And I said, listen, I loved my experience in Miami Beach, and now it's time to bring it to Tallahassee to make the changes in our state that I know I can do if given the opportunity.
I was there along with a lot of media the day that you made the announcement of your candidacy in Wynwood, big, beautiful warehouse that you own, picture of John F. Kennedy there behind you, Martin Luther King and Harriet Tubman, other of your heroes. It was a beautifully orchestrated kind of candidacy announcement. I haven't, frankly, seen one better. But, as I wrote in the Miami Herald, it was almost too perfect. I mean, you had everything planned to fare thee well. Where's the spontaneity?
Oh, Michael, I'll tell you one thing, and I think you'd agree, I've probably been the most spontaneous elected leader in South Florida, good and bad. But the fact is that what we have done, we focused on, and what I did when I ran for mayor is, we go direct to the voters. We make sure that we take our message direct to the voters. We want them to understand, why am I running? What's this about? Who are my heroes? And today, in today's day of politics, they need to see it visually, they need to hear it. When I ran for mayor, I knocked on 6,000 doors. I've been all over Florida the last 7 or 8 months, and I plan to run a 67-county strategy to get our message across.
Well, you have started, among other things, Florida, huge state, with 11 media markets, and now you are running, you're spending $800,000, your campaign is, on an ad. I want to run a little bit, if we can, of the ad that you just put on the air in English and Spanish. Let's take a listen.
Washington politicians pointed fingers at each other. I pointed a cargo plane filled with life-saving supplies to San Juan. I said we will never turn our back on the people of Puerto Rico. I meant it, and I always will. Nosotros siempre estaremos con Puerto Rico.
Pretty good Spanish, I've got to say. Mine is worse than that, but where did you learn your Spanish?
Estudié español en España. I learned Spanish in Spain.
Yeah.
And of course, I constantly speak it. When I ran for mayor, they always said, how can that successful entrepreneur win? He's got no name ID. And by the way, our city's 50% Hispanic. What they didn't realize is puede hablar español fluentemente. And it's very, very important to communicate with your constituents.
Well, what about Puerto Ricans? We know that because of this tragedy of Hurricane Maria, that by next summer there could be roughly an additional 250,000 Puerto Ricans in the state of Florida. They can vote, and they are a prize. You appear, I know, right after the hurricane, you took that plane, that charter plane down with relief supplies. You're targeting this group to vote for you. Why should they?
Well, I think it's very important. I think they have to understand what we're trying to reach them is that we will be there for them. You know, I spent my life building a company in the cruise ship industry. I was in Puerto Rico every Monday. I was in Old San Juan, and I know Puerto Rico. And I think the people of Puerto Rico, as they move to Florida, they have to figure out who is going to best help them through this transition, and be there for them. What we saw happen in that relief effort out of Washington was an embarrassment to our entire country. There was no executive leadership. I can tell you what we saw in Normandy, what we saw in the Berlin airlift was an example of what America can do. What we saw, what happened in Puerto Rico, truly was not what America's about, not what we can get done.
You know, Rick Scott visited Puerto Rico a couple of times. He has reached out. The state of Florida has tried to be helpful. Do you fault Governor Scott on the way he has acted in reaction to that tragedy?
No, absolutely not. Matter of fact, during Hurricane Irma, I know besides the nursing home tragedy, Governor Scott was out there, as well as myself, and I think that's very admirable. But you know what? I think it comes down to believability, credibility, and authenticity. Yeah. Governor Scott all of a sudden became a born-again environmentalist in the last couple of weeks. I love that. You know, Michael, you always see it with these politicians. You know, yeah. You'll see them, for example, they're environmentalists, yet, for example, they will vote for the Keystone Pipeline. Or, you know, they are pro-Affordable Health Care Act, but they'll vote against it. In other words, people want real people. Say who you are. Your journey says a lot about your future.
All right, let's talk, if we can, Philip, a little bit about some key issues. And let's begin with education, which is just to the entire state, is just a really significant issue. Charter schools, do you believe there is a role for charter schools?
Right. So, Michael, let me explain that. I went to public school my whole life down here. You know, I went to Attucks Middle School in Dania. I went to Hollywood Hills High School. I did okay for myself. I'm a big believer in public schools. So the question is, do you want to invest in your public schools or do you not? It comes down to priorities. So I believe in public schools. I believe investing in public schools. People ask me about charter schools and private schools. I think they're fantastic. They're great. Matter of fact, all the world for them. I hope they do really, really well because I like competition. But I don't think we should invest in someone else's business. Now, the example I'll give you is the post office. That's our business. We own the post office. We should invest in the post office. I don't think we should invest in FedEx and DHL and UPS. That's someone else's business. But I think they're great companies. So let's keep them separate, but let's invest in the business we got, which is public schools. Pay teachers more, make them better.
Well, let's dig down a little bit here.
Sure.
House Bill 7069 in the last session of the legislature, a controversial bill, and it provided, among other things, $140 million for charter schools, so-called schools of hope. House Speaker Richard Corcoran, the main rabbi behind that, although he's a Catholic. What about $140 million for schools that, in large part, have either failed or are substandard in minority communities?
Sure. So my feeling is if a school gets a grade that's really bad, why wouldn't you invest in that school? In other words, in business, we look at things a little differently. If a unit's not doing well, you invest in that unit. That's your priority. So I'm not so sure if things aren't going well with our post office, do you want to go invest in FedEx? In other words, if things aren't going well in our public school, do you want to invest in someone else's school? No, invest in our own school. Public schools are fantastic. Our teachers are the most important. Let's invest in them going forward. Let's not ignore them. Yeah. And once again, I think private schools and charter schools are great. I just don't want to put our taxpayer money into them.
All right, so you are against the schools of hope idea, $140 million.
Let me tell you what I'm for. I'm for making all our public schools the schools of hope, not just picking out, make them all the schools of hope by investing and making it a priority.
All right, well, let's talk about the environment. You just did say that Governor Scott is kind of late to the party. Early budgets did not include a lot of money for Florida Forever or for Everglades restoration. Where do you stand on the environment?
It's most important. Think about it. If we want Lockheed and Boeing and Apple and Amazon to come here, let me tell you what they want. They want a clean environment. They want to make sure that the millennials and the folks that are moving to Florida have an environment they can be proud of. Water is our big issue going forward, whether it's polluted water that's putting out algae blooms from Lake Okeechobee, whether it's, God forbid, offshore drilling in Northwest Florida, whether it's the saltwater intrusion we've seen from sea level rise into our aquifer. We need to be the stewards of our environment. We have to invest in our environment. It's the most important thing, and that includes fighting back sea level rise.
And so Governor Scott and the legislature have actually come up with a good share of the money for Everglades restoration. You support, you believe that
absolutely,
on the right
we
track?
need to do way more, Michael. Way more. We're too late to that party, actually.
Yeah, and the huge reservoirs south of the lake to help filter out the toxins.
100%.
Yeah,
but out there quite a bit, and it's so important. And this comes down to the whole thing about investing in our infrastructure. And as you know, in Miami Beach, we've done it. And we need to make sure the entire state of Florida realizes how important this is going forward.
All right, well, let's come back, talk about taxes and a minimum wage, all kinds of other things.
Sure.
We'll come back with Philip Levine, candidate for governor, in just a minute. Welcome back. Live in our studio this morning, Philip Levine, Democratic candidate for governor. Philip, we have had Gwen Graham on this program and Chris King so far. In the future, we will have Adam Putnam, probably going to be the Republican candidate for governor. When it comes to these Democrats, how are you different? What do you offer that either Gwen Graham or Chris King or Andrew Gillum doesn't?
Well, it's a little different. You know, I'm an entrepreneur, Michael, as you know. And in business, we do things differently. We don't necessarily talk about all the things we're going to do in the future. We actually talk about the things we've done. Whether it's minimum living wage, sea level rise, LGBTQ, we've done it in 4 years as the mayor of Miami Beach. That's a real big difference. Getting it done or talking about what you're going to do in the future.
Yeah, well, Gwen Graham was elected a Democrat in a basically Republican congressional district, went to Congress for 2 years. Chris King builds affordable housing. Andrew Gillum, young, successful mayor of Tallahassee. It's not as if they don't have track records.
Well, Michael, let me ask you a question. When it comes to minimum living wage, which one of them has actually voted for it or passed it? We did in Miami Beach. When it comes to sea level rise and climate change, tell me which ones have made their community resilient. Or when it comes to LGBTQ issues, tell me which one's gotten a perfect score over the last 4 years.
All right, well, let's go back.
We can go on through a list of that, but
let's go back to $15 an hour living wage. Yes, you and the City Commission on Miami Beach passed that, and the courts held that it was unconstitutional. It's something only the state can do. So was that an empty gesture, or what was it?
Absolutely not. It was the beginning of the right fight, Michael. In our state, as you know, the state passed a referendum that people voted to allow the local communities to control their minimum living wage. Right. What happened in Tallahassee is what they do all the time these days, is they preempted what the local communities did. Kind of what the Soviet Union did with central planning out of Moscow, which wouldn't really work out too well for them over those years.
Yeah, Havana does the same thing.
Exactly, and I believe we take the power back to the people. As Thomas Jefferson said, government works best, it's closest to the people, and that to me is a major initiative. But remember something, this is going to go all the way to the Florida Supreme Court next year. That's where this is going to be. I never realized we could be sued by so many people.
You know, you obviously have been a very successful businessman. I suspect there's some business people out there, men and women, who are listening to this saying, $15 an hour, I mean, I'm already paying $11 or $12 an hour. That would kill me. I'd have to lay people off. What do you say to people who say we can't afford that?
Well, Michael, I would say, first of all, we didn't propose $15 an hour. What we proposed in Miami Beach is bringing it to $10.10 an hour, all the way up to $13.10 an hour. So $15 an hour is nothing that we proposed in Miami Beach. That's number one. Number two, what is
your figure?
What I'm proposing is this. Come up with a number that's fair across the state, but let the local communities decide what's right. Remember something, in Miami Beach, it costs a lot more to buy a hamburger than it does up in Tallahassee. So why should we have the same minimum living wage? In other words, let the local communities decide. That, to me, is the key here going forward. But, you know, Michael, I love the old stories that, you know, people say that, you know, $8.25 an hour, that's all we can pay our people. And, you know, that McDonald's will go out of business. You know what I'll say? I said, listen, that McDonald's is not one McDonald's. There's 180 McDonald's owned by a private equity group out of Chicago, and they love that you're subsidizing their business. Because you and I both know you can't live on $8.25 an hour. So who's paying for it? Yeah. We are as taxpayers. Let the businesses pay for their own people.
Yeah. Philip, you had a good run as governor, as mayor of Miami Beach, 4 years. But you are first among equals as the mayor in Miami Beach. The city manager is the main administrator. I think some people are going to say, okay, he's a bright young guy, he's done well in business, and he was the mayor, but is he ready to be the chief executive officer of a state with 20 million people and an $83 billion a year budget. Are you ready?
Sure. Well, I can tell you one thing, Michael. I started with $500 and I built companies worth hundreds of millions of dollars, which I ran as CEO. So that was before I became mayor of Miami Beach. Okay, yeah. Mayor of Miami Beach, as you know, we have a great city manager, and we got a lot of great things done. But I think the key here is about leadership. I have a big sign I had in City Hall that says the speed of the leader determines the rate of the pack. And you'll find that in any organization or any company. No one knows everything about everything, but you find great people and they do it. One thing I'll say, it may not sound like a Democrat, but I think the worst background for government is government.
All right, well, you are only limited government in your background, and that brings me to another obvious question. You have no experience with the legislature controlled by Republicans, and I think no matter what happens in 2018, it'll still be controlled by Republicans. If you should win, here's a Democrat, a South Florida politician, Miami Beach, who happens to be Jewish. How are you going to get along with these Republicans up there?
Well, one thing I'll tell you is I believe that my ability as an entrepreneur and a business person, I cross over. And I can convince people and I can be convinced to get to a point where we both can work together. That's number one. You know, the greatest question in the world is, how can this Miami Beach Democratic Jew win statewide? It's my favorite question, by the way.
All right.
But I did a little research. Number one, I found out craziest thing. The majority of the population in Florida lives in South Florida. Who would have known? Number two, I found out that the majority of Democrats live in South Florida. Number three, the last time I looked, I was the only candidate out of South Florida, and I knew this African-American guy. Michael, it's the craziest thing. He ran twice, won the state twice, became president of the United States of America, and an old Jewish guy that almost got the Democratic nomination by the name of Bernie Sanders. People don't care anymore. They don't care if you got blue skin, 3 heads. If you can make their life better, you can communicate and connect with them, they're voting for you.
All right. Well, what you've just done is provide a persuasive argument for winning the primary, but then you get to the general election, and if you're in Pahokee or, you know, Yeehaw Junction or up in the Panhandle, people there don't know you. How are you going to get known? Well,
I could see as a television commercial just went on, you replayed it. We're going to make sure we go direct to the voters. We're going to make sure that every voter in the state, all 67 counties, unconventionally, know who I am, what I stand for, and why I'm running for governor.
Yeah, Philip, I just think that the main question a lot of people have about politicians at every level these days is there is a huge hunger for political leaders to bring us together. We are in such a divided, divisive state in the country, and I think to an extent in Florida, in South Florida, a lot of dissatisfaction. How do you bring people together?
Michael, I'm not right and I'm not left. I'm forward. I've always been, I always will be, okay? And as I go to a Democratic event, I'll say, listen, yeah, I'm a Democrat, but before I'm a Democrat, I'm an American. And I think that's the most important message going forward. We are a purple state, and you make purple by mixing red and blue, not more of either by mixing both. That's the key going forward.
That's a good point on which to end this conversation for now, but going to invite you right now, come on back with some of the other Democratic candidates for governor, and we'll have a good, lively debate.
Would love it. Thanks so much.
All right, Philip Levine, thanks for being in. All right, up next, we are going to take the big topics of the week to the Powerhouse Roundtable. It is that time again, time to take a closer look at the week's top news stories with our roundtable to get some expert analysis and judicious opinion on what's going on in our world. Oh, we've got a good one for you today. Ed Pizzoli, roundtable regular, president of the Tripp Scott Law Firm in Fort Lauderdale, and a big voice in Republican Party politics. Jessica Fernandez is a former president of the Miami Young Republicans and now is the chairwoman. She also was a delegate to last summer's GOP convention. And welcome back to our friend Nancy Ankrum, editorial page editor of the Miami Herald, and also to Sergio Bustos, senior editor for Politico Florida. Sergio has covered state politics for the AP and the Herald. All of you, good morning. Great to have you come in. Thanks for bringing the turnover chain that you wore a couple of weeks ago.
I'm not a fair weather fan.
We know that. We'll get to the chain in a while. But first, if we can, Nancy, let's begin with TPS for Haitians. Yes. Here we have 60,000 Haitians who have lived in this country for at least 7 years, protected by TPS, and this week they found out that in July 2019, if they're not gone by then, they will be deported.
This is considered a real tragedy in the Haitian community, the Haitian American community here. They have 18 months now to either seek residency or they will have to return to Haiti by July 2019. The one slight bright spot here, which as we editorialized, they really need to work, is there are several bills in Congress looking to normalize, and bipartisan bills,
Right.
looking to normalize not just Haitians, but Nicaraguans and
Although,
others who are here.
Excuse me, although Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, who has spoken on the House floor on behalf of extending TPS, we should say every South Florida member of Congress has said we need this. Ileana apparently came off the floor about a week ago and said, I talk about it, nobody seems to care.
Well, I think they care, but we in South Florida acutely care because we have a better understanding of what's going on in Haiti and how that's affecting Haitian American community here. Putting the TPS issue but in clearer focus, though, it's temporary. And so we have had it since 2010. It's been extended 4 times. And frankly, I would like to see a legislative fix to this. Congress is the right place for it.
Right.
And instead of having people live 18-month to 18-month to 18-month extension.
Right.
And lastly, it's an important point that Nancy brought out. Haitians who are here under TPS can apply for residency here, and they should go do so if they want to stay here. I think that is a more appropriate way to deal with this. We have effectively created these issues by laying out this plan in a way that was really not well thought out.
Yeah, but Sergio, I again come back to the point that Ileana Ros-Lehtinen made. Congress can't agree on much of anything, and this is part of immigration reform, and that's just a topic that is toxic.
I was a Washington correspondent in 1999, so that was 18 years ago. Immigration was a huge topic then, and nothing got done. I left in 2005. It was a hot topic then, and nothing got done. It's 2017. I agree with everything here today. Immigration is one of those strange issues where everyone on the left and the right is right about it. But at the end of the day, this is a policy that had good intentions but bad consequences.
You know,
and I don't think anything's going to happen.
I'm afraid you're right, but Jessica, in this community, the economic fallout, the disruption from more than 30,000 Haitians leaving. I saw in the Wall Street Journal, the general manager of the Hotel Intercontinental said, gee, I don't know how I'm going to replace all the Haitian Americans who work at this hotel, and that's probably true throughout a lot of this community.
Look, I'm sure that's going to create a lot of disruptions, but again, this is a call to action to Congress. You know, this temporary status doesn't do anything positive for anyone. It keeps these people, these poor people that suffered a major tragedy where they had to leave their country, it keeps them in this kind of perpetual limbo. So I do agree with the fact of ending this executive action, because this is not the correct place to have this type of legislation. It should go through an act of Congress. I agree with my colleagues on this panel. And I think, more than anything, it kind of illuminates some of the deficiencies in the international community's response to fixing the things in Haiti. We haven't been able to return to Haiti because their country has not recovered.
I think that the numbers work for and against. Ileana says, I talk about it, as you said, and it's only 60,000 people. I'm talking just Haitians now, but they are not the only TPS recipients here.
Hondurans, Guatemalans,
exactly.
Nicaraguans.
It's only 60,000 people. So, we would say editorially, it's 60,000 people this country can absorb and deal with it, especially because the majority of them are working, contributing, or sending remittances home. Congress, I'm sure, is saying it's only 60,000 people. What's the big deal?
Yeah. If we can, I want to put a human face on this discussion before we move on. This week, the Haitian Women of Miami, run by Marlene Bastien, had a news conference, and a 10-year-old girl spoke there who was born in this country, and her parents may have to be deported. Let's listen to what she had to say.
How can you deport these people who have been here for so long? They have been contributing to the social, economic, and political fabric of this great nation. How can you do this to me? How can you do this to us?
Wow. I think that little girl ought to go to Washington and do a little lobbying.
I agree.
She has been to Washington. She and her father are the real deal. We did a Facebook Live with them a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
She is just dynamic, and she is just the most articulate 10-year-old that I've come across in quite a while.
Yeah. Well, there is a human face beyond just simply the numbers. If we can, let's move on to another huge story this week. Ed Pizzoli, we now know that there are accusations of sexual misconduct against John Conyers, congressman from Michigan, and against Al Franken, senator from Wisconsin. And also Joe Barton, congressman from Texas, is accused of having a kind of a seedy affair and posting pictures on Facebook or otherwise. I mean, it's pretty disgusting stuff.
It's distasteful, and I would say what is more concerning are a couple things. There are two things that we have to be concerned with. One is that we found out this week that Congress is using a slush fund to pay people who bring claims of this nature so that they can just be done with it.
Right.
And
Conyers,
there's no
Conyers
transparency.
paid off the woman who complained against him, and that's taxpayers' money.
Well, he paid it through his office account. Somehow they couched it in the form of severance. Now, I don't know whether the allegations are true or whether or not the severance was reasonable or not, Michael.
Right.
And I want to avoid being so dramatic around, because these things have to be put in the right context. You cannot say death to someone's political career over a set of allegations. And I think that needs to be handled equally across party lines.
Right.
On the other hand, I do think what the allegations concerning Conyers is concerning. One is that he had a superior position to the subordinate whom the alleged victim. That's a big problem anywhere, particularly in Congress. And two, that was utilized public monies to pay somebody severance. That again is just the allegation. With respect to Franken, it's a little bit different because the allegations are coming out of his non-public life when he was an entertainer, and he wasn't in Congress then. So there's a little bit of a difference. If they're true, then people can pass judgment on all they want. But from a public policy standpoint, it is less concerning than what Conyers did.
Yeah. Well, your point. Let's be nuanced. Let's
Right.
be. There are differences between.
That's right.
Somebody who is, say, Judge Roy Moore. And according to the woman who says she was 14 when he took her and undressed her and had some kind of a sexual encounter, which is very disturbing.
Again, it's death by politics, though. It's not death by a court of law.
Well,
what my point being is that you raise that issue. Again, we've got to be careful about these things because there are relationships between men and women and consenting adults. The question is where the superior position lies, and was it coercion, one, and two, is there public monies and funds involved that the public simply doesn't know about?
All good questions. Jessica, when you hear about all these accusations, it's not exactly new. Mark Foley was a congressman from West Palm Beach a number of years ago. He was sending sexual texts and emails to young male pages in Congress. He lost his job because of it. So it's not exactly something new, but it's something disturbing.
No, it's not something new. And what we're seeing is that people that have been victimized are coming forward now more than ever, and they're being, buffered by other people. This whole Me Too campaign was very illuminating. As a female, they say the future is female. I think this is kind of a moment of reckoning, for women to take.
The tipping point, do you think?
Absolutely. I think this is, we have to for women to have equality, equity in our society, we have to bring these things up to the table and discuss them and have a very honest conversation. We cannot allow Congress to have a slush fund to pay secretly, the people that they have victimized. So I think it's a big culture problem with people in power. And if people might follow the Pence rule, they might have avoided a lot of these issues.
Right.
Which he was criticized for.
Which he's very much.
Yeah, I mean the Pence rule. If you follow the Pence rule, then business is going to probably just grind to a halt. If you can't be alone, if you're a man and you can't be alone with a woman, unless your wife is in the room, then you've got a major problem.
I agree. All right, everybody, hold your thoughts. We're going to come back, talk more with the roundtable after a break. Welcome back. We are having the usual robust roundtable discussion here, and if we can, before we get off the sexual misconduct thing, I want to play a clip of President Trump on Thursday before he left for Mar-a-Lago when he was asked about Judge Roy Moore in Alabama. Here's the president.
Well, he denies. Roy Moore denies it. And by the way, he gives a total denial. And I do have to say, 40 years is a long time. He's run 8 races. and this has never come up. We don't need a liberal person in there, a Democrat, Joan.
Whoa. So Sergio Bustos, in other words, he's not exactly embracing Roy Moore, but he's not putting a lot of distance between him either. And he's saying Doug Jones is, you know, Democrats unacceptable.
Yeah, I think you got to be careful with Trump because, you know, his instincts to this point, everyone keeps writing him off on things, and he ends up somehow getting his way on things because he just says it enough. I'll give you another example. I know that it's far from this one, but the NFL and the kneel.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think a lot of people thought, well, I understand what the players are doing, but Trump twisted it around enough, and he kept tweeting enough that you said, well, okay, now
Well,
they
he
seem to be on the right side.
Yes,
on that
he's
one.
excellent at recasting the argument, also taking your attention away from something else
Right.
and then moving it to where he wants it to be. Ed, the president did send out a tweet about half an hour ago, and there's an indication that maybe he will go to Alabama and campaign for Roy Moore. You think so?
I don't know, because, you know, let's start with the basics, though. He supported Roy Moore's opponent, Luther Strange. I mean, and he lost in the primary. Roy Moore has a high name ID, obviously, in Alabama, and all politics ultimately is local. You know that,
Yeah,
Michael. So
yes.
I think Alabama voters are going to have to decide this. And I'm going to say, given what we've also found out now about Congress the last couple of weeks, it puts a little bit of a different context in it of the, how would you say, the moral authority of the Senate not to seat him should he win. That's going to be very interesting when you have like Al Franken voting on to whether or not to seat Roy Moore. Boy, oh boy, have we really kind of come down,
I do think, though, that I hear what you're saying. I do think, though, that we have to be, you mentioned nuance earlier. I do think we have to be very careful about what an Al Franken did in making no excuses and not supporting him, which looked like foolishness. Bad foolishness, which upset the victim, but foolishness nonetheless. And being a sexual predator, being a man almost in your mid-30s and preying on not just teenage girls,
being
but
banned
young
from the
teenage
mall.
girls.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
there's a difference. I don't think there's an equivalency there.
Yeah. All right, let's move on if we can. This coming week, Jessica, the president on Tuesday is going to meet with leaders of Congress because, among other things, they have to fund government spending because on December 8th, it's going to run out, money to run the government. And it looks like he is going to have to do a deal with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and the Democrats. What do you think is going to happen there?
Listen, anybody who says they know what's going to happen is probably not telling the truth. Look, I think this is a very unique president. I don't think anybody can deny that. You know, this is somebody who has bucked his party, has bucked, you know, traditions, and, you know, I think he wants to find the best deal that he can. And, you know, if he has to find support and build a coalition, you know, with other legislators, I think that he's shown a willingness to do that. And I think that's a good quality for a president to have.
Well, he is going to have to give in on something because Sergio, quite frankly, over the course of 11 months, he doesn't have one major legislative victory. And if they're going to do tax reform before the end of the year, he's going to have to give something to the Democrats to get it.
And not if you follow his Twitter account, because he just has this way of continually pounding away that it's never his fault, and it's always those on the outside. And for his base, this 30–40% group, this seems to just play right into their hands, and they love it. At the end of the day, though, nothing gets done, and I think that's the difficulty.
But wait. Headline. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are going to actually participate in the governing of the United States? You mean they're just not going to resist? Oh my God, that should be the headline lead story tonight on Channel 10 News. I mean, come on.
They're doing their job.
So right, they're actually doing their job in Congress, because I'll tell you, I've reviewed the tax reform bill, and I don't really, it's not my favorite piece of legislation. I think they should have gone further, to be honest. But there are pieces in that bill that Democrats should support and are not, simply for political reasons, and that is a shame, Michael.
Oh, I wonder where they learned that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Probably knows no partisan boundary.
Senator McConnell is not exactly a come to Jesus type.
Senator McConnell, yeah, well, It depends on who you ask, right?
All right, if we can, I want to ask each of you your opinion. Here, Philip Levine, running for governor, was here earlier, and I think made a pretty good case why he is a viable candidate. But, you know, Nancy, he is really, and I should have asked him directly about this, he is following the Rick Scott template, because Rick Scott spent $73 million in his first race. He was an unknown. He got known through media exposure, ran a very savvy race. And, you know, Mr. Levine told me earlier that he is willing to spend millions of his own money to get known around the state. Does he have a chance?
Oh, of course he has a chance. I mean, it's a long time between here and Election Day next year. Who knows what's going to happen? I think he's trying to get a little anti-Trump bounce by who he is, by being a moderate, by being a Democrat, by actually having some accomplishments in Miami Beach. Now, I don't think Miami Beach is going to resonate, you know, up on the I-4 corridor. So he's going to have to work it. He's going to be as savvy as Scott was.
And we have just put up on the screen the pictures of the other announced candidates. Qualifying hasn't even happened. Before we run out of time, okay, we're going to move on quickly. Ed, very nicely, we appreciate you having brought in your University of Miami, your proud alumnus,
That's it.
your turnover chain. I happen to think that this is kind of an act of genius on the part of somebody in the coaching staff at the university. Well, Manny Diaz, the defensive coordinator. But, you know, my point is, I find it gaudy and over the top and kind of a little in bad taste and great. I mean, I just think it's a great motivator for these kids and for the community.
Yeah, don't take yourself so seriously. When the kid, this wouldn't be known if they didn't have, if the defense didn't play their hearts out all year and get turnovers.
Yeah.
And so when the kids get turnovers, they run off that field excited with big smiles on their face. The coach puts this on them. They stand up. They turn to the crowd. The crowd gives them a great cheer. Yeah. It's pure joy for both the fans and the players. And let's say this. The university has accomplished something that no politician has. It has brought together the community, and let's give them credit for it.
All right, that's the final word, and a good one, too. Thank you all for coming in. Great roundtable. All right, coming up, we're going to remember that this is the one-year anniversary of Fidel Castro's death. We'll have a report from our man in Havana. One year ago yesterday, Fidel Castro died. That caused an outpouring of grief and mourning in Cuba, as you would expect, and celebrations in Miami. Yesterday, the anniversary of the death was met with a shrug in Miami, but was observed nationwide in Cuba. Our man in Havana, Hatzel Vela, spoke with the Cuban journalist about how Fidel Castro will probably be remembered.
Fidel's image remains ingrained in the minds of Cubans throughout the island. It was a year ago. Local 10 was here documenting his death. A year later, we look at his life through the eyes of a Cuban journalist.
Eso me impresionó tanto, realmente.
The first meeting with Fidel Castro impressed Gabriel Molina. It is March 13, 1959, months after Castro seizes power in Cuba, when Cubans are paying homage to fallen college students who staged an attack on the presidential palace 2 years prior. Molina had just returned from exile in Spain and was organizing one of the new revolutionary newspapers, El Combate. Then he organized the communist paper called Hoy. The longtime journalist was there documenting one of many Castro speeches.
Esta también me gusta mucho por la expresión de Fidel.
And here is proof, a trove of pictures where you see Molina by Castro's side, asking questions at the same time, developing a relationship with Castro.
A cada rato que iba a algún lugar me empezó a pensar.
Castro took a liking to him and would call on him to cover certain things, a personal correspondent of sorts in the early 60s. Here is Molina with Castro's entourage during the missile crisis.
Hubiera sido un desastre tremendo.
It would have been a catastrophic disaster, he says, of those days when the world came to a nuclear brink of war.
Tomaron la decisión sin avisarnos.
He remembers stern words from Castro, who was astounded the Soviet Union had not consulted with him before agreeing with the U.S. to remove the missiles from Cuba. Then, in '63, post-crisis, here's Molina with Castro on a visit to the former Soviet Union.
Era un personaje.
He describes Castro as an international personality, leader of the PAC, but Castro has many profiles. And we saw that upon the announcement of his death in South Florida. He is no hero, hated by many who lost family during and after the revolution, those who say he is responsible for the separation of many and the island's economic decay for almost 6 decades now. But here on the island, during 9 days of mourning, Cubans paid tribute to the revolutionary leader.
Era la inteligencia y la bravura.
It was his intelligence and his bravery, and that's part of the legacy Molina says Castro leaves behind. Molina would eventually become director of Granma International, the state-run newspaper. A year after Castro's death, he flips through pictures filled with history. Love him or hate him, he certainly is a historical figure. I'm Hatsovella, Local 10 News, Havana.
History will not absolve him. Still to come, my personal perspective about a great man's passing. Judge William Hoovler is dead. His legacy lives on. Here is a live look now from our Miami Tower Cam, and here is Weather Authority meteorologist Jennifer Correa with your Sunday forecast. Jennifer.
Hey, South Florida, good afternoon. So blue skies still all across South Florida, and we're expecting it to still warm up just a little bit, but temperatures have stayed in the 70s so far for the early afternoon hours, and right now it is the upper 70s in Miami down through the Keys. Temperatures should stay like that for the rest of today. Highs only hitting 79 degrees. Now the winds continue out of the northeast around 5 to 10 miles per hour. No rain on the radar. Mostly sunny for today, and then tomorrow becoming breezy with more clouds developing. Even some showers could hit the lower Keys, middle Keys as well, and a stray shower along our coast. Otherwise, the better chance for rain will arrive on Tuesday and Wednesday.
Jennifer, thanks. All right, before we leave you today, a personal perspective about the passing of a truly great man in our community, Judge William Hoovler. He died a few days ago at the age of 95. He was a legendary federal judge in South Florida, renowned for fairness, intelligence, integrity, and grace under pressure. He presided over some high-profile cases, including the trial of Panama's Manuel Noriega. Noriega even complimented the judge after the guilty verdict for being fair with him. Judge Hoovler was always fair. The judge sentenced Noriega to 40 years, but he also deemed him a prisoner of war, so Noriega could be held in a somewhat more comfortable prison cell. Judge Bill Hoovler was tough but compassionate. Before that Noriega trial, an Associated Press photographer named Bill Cook, also a friend of mine, called up the judge and asked him to come down from his office so he could take some pictures. Cameras aren't allowed in federal courthouses. Some other federal judges might have balked, said no, but not Bill Hoovler. He came down, let Bill Cook take the pictures, and the two guys became good friends for the rest of their lives. Bill Cook was a hard-scrabble, tough-talking Vietnam veteran. Judge Hoovler was a patrician Harvard Law graduate, but they hit it off. It said a lot about both men. We live in an anti-heroic age. So many people in public life have disgraced themselves, tarnished their office, betrayed our trust. Judge Hoovler never did. He was an honorable man who set the bar high in everything he did and always reached it. It was a privilege for me to know him, to have sat in his courtroom, and to see the example he set. He was the best of the best. Rest in peace, Judge Hoovler. That's my perspective for this week. I hope you have a wonderful Sunday. Remember, as always, stay informed, get involved. We'll see you next Sunday.